Okay. I will be making the presentation, so just alert the committee that we are ready to proceed if needed.
Okay, is it only you and Mr. Lewis?
I believe other members of the executive will also be joining. Chairperson, I know there is a lot of conflicting appointments and maybe just a few more minutes to give them a chance. I have not received notification that they will not join.
Okay, I'm going to wait until about 5 past, and then I'm going to start, and then they can join when they are ready.
Noted, Chair.
I wish to welcome everybody to the Standing Committee meeting on education on this virtual platform. I'm going to mute everyone for now. Okay, I have muted everyone for now. Members, I just want to ask that there is a chat function button. By now you know it already. If you need to speak to or want to speak to points of order, please put it in the chat line on the right hand side, and then there is a hand raise function. So please raise your hands if you would want to pose a question or give a point of order. And then in terms of the when it is your turn to speak, please can we agree that we will only use the mic function and not the video camera function. And then the department is going to do the presentation. Thereafter, I will give each member in this committee a first round of 2 questions. If time permits, we'll go to a second round. If time permits, we'll go to a third round, and so on. So we'll do the round one, the questions, and we'll ask the department to respond to that, and thereafter we will do that accordingly. My name is Lorraine Botha, and I'm the chairperson for the Standing Committee on Education. Members, I shall now ask you to please introduce yourselves.
Hello, thank you, Chairperson. I am Mohammed Khalid Sayed, member of the committee.
Thank you, Chairperson Ricardo Mackenzie.
Good afternoon, Chairperson Gillian Bosman, member of the committee.
Member Allen, I heard you before. Are you in the meeting? No? Okay, I wish to also, somebody's mic is on and there's a bit of background noise. So please, if you can switch off your mic. I wish to recognize also Wasima Hassan Musa, our procedural officer. To the department, all the officials that is on, please can you introduce yourselves for the record?
Chair and members, Archie Lewis, DDG for Institution Development and Coordination.
Chairperson, this is Leon Eli. I'm the CFO for Education. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair. Anna Veldman, Chief Director, Financial Management.
Mr. Eli, do I take it that just the three of you? Because last week I missed a few officials. I did not give them an opportunity to introduce. Mr. Lewis was one of those. I don't want to miss anyone.
Well, Chair, to does appear it's only the three of us.
Thank you, Mr. Eli. Then I want to welcome the media and everybody who is tuned in via YouTube. Welcome to this virtual meeting on the Standing Committee of Education. Members, I just wish to know, Member Karma, you were on earlier. You did not introduce yourself. We seem to miss now Member Karma and Member Allen. IT, if you can assist us, please.
I have requested from IT to assist Member Allen, and I will ask him for Member Karma as well.
Please, any apologies, Wasima?
None received from any members.
Okay, thank you very much. Department of Education is going to brief this committee today on the norms and standards funding for schools in our province. Ms. Veldman, as indicated by you earlier, I'm giving over to you to do the presentation. I'm just checking, Wasima, I also did not hear Member Christians.
Member Christians is here.
Good afternoon, Chair. I was locked out and I had to log in again.
Okay, good afternoon. Welcome, member.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Veldman, I'm giving over to you for the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson, and good afternoon, Chairperson and members once again. I am sharing the file. If the committee can confirm whether it is visible.
We can see, thank you.
I must just make sure now that I can. Chairperson, will you allow me? I'm just pressing to my second slide. If you can confirm if it is moving on your side.
We still see the first slide.
All right, I am working on fixing that.
Ms. Veldman still on the first slide?
I note, Chair. Chairperson, this presentation was also shared with the members.
Yes, indeed, I concur. We have received.
If it is on a worst case scenario, Chairperson, that the slideshow is problematic in moving, would I be able to prefer to slide numbers as we proceed? Or is it possible for the committee to share the presentation from their side and I can direct when I move to the next slide? I seem to have a technical problem to move my slides.
Otherwise, I can ask the procedural officer whether she could assist.
I would appreciate to not delay the committee, Chairperson.
Okay,
I'll see what I can do.
Okay. At this point in time, I just want to welcome Member Allen. Member, while we are waiting for the presentation, you can introduce.
Thank you, Chairperson. I'm Regan Allen and I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. I can see your presentation from my side if you are ready for us to proceed.
Sure, we are ready. Thank you. Now we have a busy slide.
Desktop, yes. I will just wait for the procedural officer.
Sorry, I'm having trouble from my side as well.
Oh my goodness.
Chairperson?
Yes, who's that?
Gillian Postman. I can share from my side if you'd like.
Yes, you can, please. In the meantime, I note that the SG has just joined us. So good afternoon, SG. If you, Ms. Veldman, if I can give to the SG, if he wants to make some opening remarks before we go on to the presentation while we are struggling.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good afternoon, Chair and honourable members. My apologies for joining slightly late. It is, and I know you will understand, a bit of a scramble at the moment. We've just come off a meeting with the National DG of Education. We normally have a regular one-on-one meeting on a Friday because of the red dates, which then needs to be able to take the adjoints. But they asked for that meeting to be today, and so that has coincided with a number of other meetings. I think Cabinet, which is the other one I'm supposed to be in, is still on. So my apologies. I will be leaving after the presentation. Mr. Eli and Ms. Veldman will be able to manage the responses quite effectively. And I am going to hand back to Mr. Eli and Ms. Veldman to respond to the presentation, unless, Chair, there's anything that you particularly would like to ask or say to me, or any members want to say to me specifically.
Thank you, SG. We note that you are going to be leaving us earlier, so that is fine with us. Thank you for the opening remarks. Ms. Veldman is ready. We can see the slide to continue with the presentation. Ms. Veldman, over to you.
Thank you, Chairperson, once again. Good afternoon, and thank you for indulging me and assisting me with technology. I believe it's one of the members now doing my administration. I humbly say thank you. Right, on slide 1, as per your request, we are going to be briefing you in terms of norms and standards for schools. Moving to the second slide. This gives you an overview in terms of the framework in which we operate and manage our schools. As we are all aware, the school system operates with a quintile system, classifying our schools between quintile 1 and 5. But then part of our school classification is also in terms of the South African Schools Act and specifically reference to Section 21, where we define schools as either Section 21 or non-Section 21. The quintile classification does not influence, and vice versa, the Section 21 classifications. They are dependent of one another. Section 21 classification just confirms the type of financial capability a school has, where once a school is classified as fully Section 21, it means it has full financial capability and it manages its finances 100% independently, whereas a school that is non-21, where we step in and assist to budget the schools, manage the school's budget on their behalf. Whereas the classification in terms of quintiles is based on a poverty ranking, where our least poor school is a quintile 5 and our poorest schools are quintile 1 and the subset in between. I will look at the details in that. You can see on slide number 2 the number of schools in the various classifications, but we'll talk in a bit more detail on the next slide. Slide 3, please. Thank you. On slide 3 is our context in terms of the national quintile system. This is communicated annually by the Minister of Basic Education, which basically gives a poverty distribution for the country and then broken down to a provincial level. If you look at the first row, which is marked as national, you will see there's an equal distribution amongst quintiles from quintile 1 to quintile 5, with the national perspective of having equal number of schools in each quintile from 1 to 5. This is then broken down into a subset for each province based on each province's relative poverty ranking. Now, if you look at our poverty ranking, you will note that for the province, we are regarded as one of the least poor provinces, with 59.3% of our schools classified for no fee, and then 40% currently is fee charging. But in terms of the national quintile distribution, we are actually only allowed to have 40% of our schools in quintile 1 to 3. But we have upranked this by creating more no-fee schools in our quintile 4 and 5 allocation, increasing that poverty allocation to a 60%, which is more in line with the national norm of 60% of schools to be allocated within quintile 1 to 3. At the bottom, you can see the number of learners. This is not based on number of schools, but the quintile distribution table is determined based on the actual learners across the province, and then the learners obviously allocated to various schools to get the poverty distribution. If I move to slide number 4. Thank you. Slide number 4 gives you the current allocation that we provide per learner for the various quintiles. For the 4-year distribution, which is the previous year, 1920, current year, 2021, and then over the MTEF, you'll see I've highlighted the quintile 4 and 5 fee charging allocation in red. Currently, we are providing 822 Rand per learner for a quintile 4 school. That's fee charging, and 336 Rand per learner for a quintile 5 school, that's fee charging, compared to the national allocation norms that's provided of 735 and 454, 254. That's attributable to additional pro-poor approach that we have of providing top-up funding to our schools that are in a very low category in terms of fee charging, which I will break down at the later slides to give you context here. You can also see on this slide that we have been able to maintain the national prescripts in terms of the allocation per school over the years to ensure that all our schools at least receive the minimum threshold as prescribed. Moving to slide number 5. On slide number 5, it provides you a picture of our no-fee schools and where they are located. If you look at quintile 1 and 2, you will note that bulk of these schools are located within our rural districts, with 263 schools of the total 270 quintile 1 schools, all in rural, plus an additional 94 schools in quintile 2 in the rural areas, and then 74 in the metros. Quintile 3 is almost an equal distribution between rural and metro, and then when you get to quintile 4 and 5 schools, you see it moves up where the distribution is more towards urban schools in these quintiles. Moving to slide number 6. On slide number 6, we are indicating how much funding has been allocated to the various quintiles. Because quintile 1, 2, and 3 by default is no fee, compulsory no fee declared schools, all the funding is allocated to these schools because they are all no fee. What is interesting to note, the quintile 4 and 5 schools, quintile 4 schools, 73% of our funding is directed towards no fee schools. But if you refer back to the previous slide, slide 5, you will note that only 59% of the schools are in quintile 4, although 73% of the money is directed towards them. So there you can see the clear indication in terms of the pro-poor approach, and even more so in terms of quintile 5, where 5% of the schools are in quintile 5, 22% of the money is directed towards them. So there's a big differentiation by simply looking at the number of schools compared to looking at how much money is diverted to those actual schools. Moving to slide number 7. Slide number 7 gives a perspective now, again, in terms of the fee charging perspective. Here we are now not differentiating in terms of quintiles. We know that these are only schools that are within quintile 4 and 5, but we rather give you a perspective in terms of the fees charged at these schools. We have created 4 intervals. The first interval is schools that charge school fees from, and we actually have fee charging schools that almost charges no school fees at all. And this is annually. All these school fees categories are annual school fees up to what we refer to as the no fee threshold. We know for a no fee school, we pay an amount of 1,466 Rand per learner. So all our fee charging schools where the school fees charged is not more than the no fee threshold. And 29% of our fee charging schools are within this category. Further to that, we are breaking these schools into 2 categories to say almost 100 of these schools are referred to as low fee schools because they are below the no fee threshold. But 65 of our low fee schools are actually, the school fees are so minuscule that when you look at the amount of school fees they charge, plus what they receive in terms of norms and standards, then they still don't reach the no fee threshold, and we provide an additional top-up amount to these schools to ensure that they will not receive less than the no fee threshold. Our key pro-poor policy principle indicates that no school within the Western Cape will receive funding below the no fee threshold. Even if they are a fee charging school, we will protect them that they will at least as a minimum receive the no fee threshold. Then we have schools in the category up to 3,000 Rand in school fees, 14% of our fee charging schools in that category, 22% of our schools in the category between 3 and 10,000 Rand, and then schools charging school fees in excess of 10,000 Rand annually per learner is 35% of our fee charging schools. I want to just highlight the 2 percentages that I wish the committee to make a note before I move to the next slide. 29% of schools are low fee and 35% of our schools are charging school fees in excess of 10,000 Rand per learner annually. Moving to slide number 8. Now, with that point just made, all funding that we provide to our fee charging schools, as you will recall, our low fee schools, 29% of our fee charging schools are low fee, but 53% of our funding channeled towards fee charging schools are directed towards these low fee schools. And only 19% of our funding that is allocated to fee charging schools is directed to those 35% schools that are in the category of charging a school fee in excess of 10,000 Rand per learner. So once again, indicating how our funding is directed in terms of a pro-poor approach. Moving to slide number 9. This slide is for the benefit of the committee in terms of this, just describing in a practical manner the technical approach we follow in terms of low fee schools. So any school, in terms of their norms and standard allocation per learner, totaled with their school fees charged, if that is less than the no fee threshold, we will provide a top-up. We indicate there are 65 schools in this category, serving 57,000 learners, and 4.5 million Rand additional is allocated towards these schools to protect them and to ensure that they do not have an income source that is below the minimum threshold to manage their schools. Moving to slide number 10. Slide number 10 is moving into the summary slides to conclude on the presentation. Chairperson, one of the questions raised was in terms of section 21 and non-21. This is just to provide that perspective. The committee will recall in the introductory remarks I indicated section 21 and non-21 is referring to schools in terms of their capability to function financially independent. They have the infrastructure and the financial know-how to manage their budgets. Section 21 schools, 1,200 of our 1,444 public ordinary schools is section 21, fully independent functioning schools. That's 83% of our schools. And 244 schools is currently assisted by us in terms of managing their budget on their behalf, and that is 17% of our schools. You will therefore note that the amount of money transferred to a non-section 21 school appears to be much less than what is transferred to a section 21 schools, and it is because some of this funding is retained and managed on their behalf. The focus that we manage on their behalf is the key one is textbooks purchases, as well as local purchases and stationery. And then on some schools, we also pay their municipal accounts on their behalf. Even section non-21 schools do receive an allocation at their school level, which we may refer to as school fees and day-to-day maintenance, so that schools are not crippled in terms of functioning. For instance, a small maintenance work like fixing a window, they will have some money available in their bank accounts to do that direct responses to those kind of activities. But the big deliverables we purchase and manage on their behalf. Should any one of these schools that are classified as section non-21 at the end of the year, when we do final reconciliation and we find that they have not utilized their full budget, that we do the procurement on their behalf, that funding will be reverted back to the school and they will still receive the full benefit in terms of their norms and standard allocation as any other school. Moving to slide number 11. Slide number 11 is just to provide context in terms of Program 2. Program 2, specifically public ordinary schools, the biggest program within the budget of the Western Cape Education Department. How much of money is prioritized towards norms and standards or transfer payments, which is classified as transfer payments. This slide shows the relationship for all non-personnel, non-capital items. So capital, because it's got its own specific purpose, and personnel by default managed on the personnel norms and standards. Excluded from this, it will be noted that bulk of the funding within Program 2 is directed towards schools, norms and standards, 58% of total Program 2 funding. The 42% remaining funding, there are a few key cost drivers within that. And to list a few, it's learner transport money, it's textbooks where we will roll out, for instance, a new CAPS line of textbooks that we purchase on behalf of all schools. It doesn't form part of their norms and standards. Furniture or textbooks to any new schools or new grades that are phased in, as well as our school feeding, will be part of the 42% remaining of the non-personnel, non-capital funding within Program 2. Slide number 12. Slide number 12 gives us the current picture in summary, linking up to our original slide of how is our distribution in terms of quintiles, learners, 59.3% in no-fee setups, versus 40.7% of our learners in a fee charging school. But if you look at the money, 82% of our funding is diverted towards our no-fee schools, and only 18% of our funding is diverted towards the fee charging schools. Slide number 13. Although this was not a direct question, just for the benefit of the committee, we also would want to provide assurance in terms of our norms and standards response to schools in times of COVID. We have not affected any reduction in budgets in terms of norms and standards allocation to schools. It remains a fully funded mandate and schools are receiving their funding. We have already made the payments aligned with the time allocations prescribed by legislation to our schools. We are also, on top of norms and standards, providing schools with their full sanitation needs on, and this is currently at a very advanced stage in terms of delivery in our readiness for learners returning to school on Monday, as per the phased approach. We have also given advice to our fee charging schools in terms of what does the South African Schools Act allow in terms of bridging capital, and one of the easiest accesses, because this is a short-term crisis we are currently managing, that schools have got a lever to apply for overdraft facilities in a time while learners are not back in school and their cash flows might be affected. We also encourage all fee charging schools to review their fee exemptions that they have granted to learners, knowing that many of our parents' financial positions have changed drastically. We are also protecting our budget in terms of compensation for fee exemption so that we will be able to honor those claims from schools. And we have also advised our schools that currently has got SGB posts, and we know all the coverage that this has received in the media in terms of the risk schools are exposed to, in terms of the avenue that has been made available in terms of COVID-19 relief to apply to the Department of Employment and Labour for the employer relief scheme for these posts at schools. And then the WCED works very closely with the DBE in relation to the COVID-19 related matters in this very fluid time we are living in. Chair, that brings the presentation to an end. Thank you so much. Slide number 14. I hand back to the chair for questions that might follow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Feldman, for that comprehensive presentation. I just wish to know at this stage from Mr. Eli, anything you want to add, sir?
No, thank you, Chair. No, I'm fine. We can take questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to note to this meeting right now that I welcome Member Brinkhuis. You have joined us. Welcome. And then from Member Bakamba Bocha, we just received a decline to join this meeting for today. Members, as indicated earlier, I'm going to allow for 2 questions per member. Taking this round now, please indicate who you are and then you may pose 2 questions.
Chairperson, Member Christian. Yeah, thank you, Chairperson, for the. I want to thank the department for the presentation. I think it's a good presentation. I just my 2 questions now is. There's some schools that we visited on our cluster week and so on that falls with that's maybe a quintile 4 because of the economic circumstances, some time back, but circumstances has changed and they're no longer in that quintile. They're not getting school fees from students. So they must write off a lot of school fees. I think the last school, Hillcrest, 500 pupils they had to write off school fees. So what happens in the case the demographics of the area has changed with the informal settlements and so on. So they're no longer quintile 4. So they've also applied to the department, but what do we do in a case like that? That is the first question. The second question also, if I look at Elsies River, there's a school that I visited, Alvenhoed Primary School in Elsies River. They also quintile 4, but they're in Clark said they're in Elsies River. They cannot be a quintile 4, and the principal said to me they cannot even afford to pay their municipal accounts because they just don't have the money, and they can't have fundraising because of gun shooting and all of that. So they are dependent on school fees, but they don't get the school fees. So I know all the presentation, but my question is the real issues on the ground. What people are facing at the moment, so what the schools are facing at the moment. So the example I made is Hillcrest, and the example I'm making is Alvenhoed Primary, that's in Elsies River. How can they be on a quintile 4? And I understand the 2020, and we must be sensitive to that. So Chair, I'll just park it there. If the department can just give me some indicator, what should those schools do in that regard? Thank you.
Thank you, Member Christians. I note Member Allen.
Thank you, Chairperson. If I can latch on to Member Christians, because I do understand that if a school is wrongly classified, especially in today's day and age, I would like to know how many schools have applied for a review of their quintile status within the last year, for example, if we can get an understanding of it, but then also for the department to explain the procedure that a school needs to take in terms of wanting that quintile classification to be changed. And then my second question would be, if a parent is denied the fee exemption and they wish to appeal that decision made, what is the actual steps that needs to be taken in that regard? That is my 2 for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Syed.
Chair, thank you very much, and let me welcome the presentation from the department. It was very, very detailed. I must thank them for that. 2 questions, Chair, and it's relating to slide number 6 in particular. I just wanted to get a sense as to how are public schools in the Western Cape, how are they expected to fund reasonable accommodations, particularly moderate to high accommodations, made in respect of the screening, identification, assessment, and support policy, the CIAS policy, to accommodate learners who experience barriers to learning, because it doesn't seem to be very clear from WCD circulars concerning the 2020 to 2021 allocations to schools and how this should be funded. Then then the second part of the question is that the CIAS policy states that schools providing moderate levels of support to learners experiencing barriers to learning need to be provided with they need to be provided with an inclusive education allocation, and this is part of the school's funding and the post-provisioning norms. Now, I wanted to know, does this allocation exist, and where is it referenced in the WCED's allocation to schools? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Member Kama.
Thank you very much, Chair, and let me also welcome the presentation. Chair, my questions will be on slide 13. I note that the department indicates that there will be no adjustments made to the norms and standards allocation for COVID-19, and that the department will be funding the initial sanitation needs of the schools. Now, I want to check if this has been arrived at with an understanding that schools will be able to finance their hygiene and safety costs moving beyond this initial funding. Also, in that, which did not really come out, I think I've heard I think it was the national department talking about the identification of teachers that are over 60 and those with the diseases that poses threat to them contracting the disease. I want to check if the department has been able to identify these teachers and what is being done to ensure that to ensure their safety. Thanks, Chair.
Ms. Veldman, that is the round of questions for now. If you can respond, thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. I will deal with the first two questions. They are interrelated. In terms of the appeal processes, whether a school can change if the quintile is in 4 or 5 and the circumstances of the community has changed drastically. We also have cases where schools' location, the direct surrounding area might not necessarily be that changed, but the learners attending that school, the profile has completely changed. We fully acknowledge that, and for that we have implemented an appeal process that looks at a very wider aspect than when the original quintile process was allocated. When the quintile system was implemented, it was the poverty ranking for communities at that time, and schools were then allocated quintiles based on the national poverty distribution in terms of how many schools can be allocated in each quintile. What schools are now expected to do when they feel that their circumstances and their quintiles are no longer aligned? They will provide an appeal application to the department, which will be considered by the minister. And it looks at 4 main aspects. Firstly, the school has got the opportunity to provide their personal context, indicating the kind of the profile of the learners attending the school, which would include giving information in terms of what are their school fee collection rate, what do they currently charge for school fees, how many exemptions they have granted. So to give us a picture of what does it look like at the school. They also then have an opportunity to provide us with context in terms of what the surrounding community and neighboring schools look like. We do have cases where we have a primary school that is, for instance, a no-fee school, and those learners that then channel automatically to the neighboring high school, and you will find the high school could be a fee charging school serving the same community. So that is from the school's perspective that they will provide when they apply for an exemption. Their exemption application will also be accommodated by their latest financial statements. From the department side, we then do a full analysis by also on a 2-layer investigation. We look at the geographical layout of our schools' profiles. We look at which schools are located in the area, what are their specific profiles according to our geo frame. We look at their fee statuses of these various schools, and if they are fee charging schools, what are their school fees they charge, so that we get a proper perspective in terms of where the school is located. The second part of our analysis is an in-detail financial assessment of the school's financial position. We will analyze the school's financial statements, looking at, for instance, their school fee collection rate, school fees they charge, their school fee exemption application trends over the years, their expenditure profile, what do they spend their money on, and we use a guideline to indicate on what level is the school currently functioning. And if the committee will allow my practical approach, we indicate a level of living of the school. Are they living above their means or within their means? We have found that sometimes you don't assist a school that is currently fee charging by making them no fee if their current commitments is above the no fee threshold, which means they could have commitments in terms of SGB posts, which they cannot have if they are a no fee school, which improves their education profile, but posts they will lose if they change to a no fee school. Or they have photocopy machines, etc., that is overhead cost that must first be reduced so that their cost of living can reduce to a level where they will be able to survive at a no fee level of funding. We also look at things like their current supplementary funding that they are able to achieve through fundraising. We have also found that no-fee schools have a struggle in terms of supplementing their income through funding initiatives, whereas fee charging schools appear to be more successful. So if they become no fee, it's likely that that source of income will also be forfeited. So we measure the living level of the school, their financial level, so that we make an informed decision before we convert a school straightforward to a no-fee school. If the decision is in the end confirmed by the minister that the school's fee status will not change from fee charging to no fee, we will accompany that response back to the school with advice on what they can implement to improve their financial position. So we will highlight specific aspects we've identified during the assessment to assist them in terms of their financial management principles and putting them on a better position in terms of their financial position. It is also possible for a school to apply more than once, because we know the situation this year could be drastically different 2 years from now. So the appeal process is not a single opportunity. Schools can continuously access this lever as their circumstances change. In the recent times, we've received a total of 51 applications, of which 14 of these appeals were approved, and those schools' fee status have been changed. 37 of the schools that applied were advised in terms of alternative approaches that is more advisable for them to look at in terms of their financial management and the current financial position they find themselves in. It's also true that schools sometimes focus on their specific problem and don't see the bigger context, and we are in the position to assist schools with that bigger context to provide them with perspective in terms of financial management. And as the South African Schools Act also explicitly indicate, although the department has got the option to declare schools a voluntary no fee as I've provided the statistics on how many schools we currently have within quintile 4 and 5, it is subject to financial viability of the department. So by default, we do not have an unlimited funding pool to change these schools into no-fee schools, and that's why we have this balanced approach between what's best for the school and what is viable for the department to maintain in terms of sound financial stability on our side. Chairperson, I hand to some of the other members from the department that's present for the questions in terms of learners with special needs. That is within program 4, not program 2, as well as the questions in terms of the delivery schedule for our sanitation items to schools.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Eli, I note you. I just want to say, members, if you have a follow-up in terms of the responses, I'll give you an opportunity after Mr. Eli. Mr. Eli, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just on the issue around the hygiene and the personal protection equipment and the need for beyond, I think we as a department, we are obviously busy delivering, and we've delivered some, in some cases, complete deliveries to some schools. So it's in various phases. But again, as I try to emphasize, we are considering and we will watch that space in terms of the requirements beyond at the moment. But again, I think Ms. Feldman has said that we obviously we are ourselves within a limited finance envelope, and so we'll approach that particular issue carefully. But again, what we've supplied now should be enough for schools to carry on for a period of time, and as that runs out, we will consider those aspects. Then, as far as teachers with over 60 and comorbidities, we have received that information, and I think the HOD can also talk about that. But we have a particular approach of how we're going to deal with those particular teachers as well, Chair. So I think we are covered in that regard. If I can just refer to the issue around, there was a question on by Mr. Christians, if parents are denied a fee exemption, the procedure is they can appeal to the department, because what happens there, Chairperson, the school applies the fee exemption based on a particular formula that DBE has given through, and then when a parent writes to the department, we will look at that in a reasonable way in terms of whether the school has applied the legislative criteria, and from there onwards we will then write to the school to say whether we adhere to the or we override the decision of the school or not. That's something that the parent can do in terms of writing to the department. Then, as far as the CS is concerned, I think from a funding perspective, we see the learner as in a public school as every learner. So we calculate our normal standards based on the learners enrolled in that school. The type of service we deliver, because there are supposed to be, some of our schools are supposed to be also that we have a name for it, inclusive centers. So, but again, and then there's also the model wrapped around that makes available additional manpower in terms of training some teachers, and we also have some staff from the districts going around to those schools to render support. So, and then also the school has to make available some additional spaces, extra classroom or whatever, where the learners can receive the particular attention. But the funding itself, it follows a public ordinary school. That's how far I know as far as the funding or the financing of those is concerned. But the CS policy, the HOD or Mr. Lewis can talk about that issue. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Eli. SG, do you want to come in here now?
I think I'm covered. Thank you, Chair, with Mr. Eli's comment. If there are any specific follow-up questions pertaining training to teachers with comorbidities, then I'm happy to comment on that if there are any follow-up questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members, that is the round. Do you want to add any follow-ups now? Member Allen, I note you.
Thank you, Chairperson. I appreciate the answer, but if we, what I'm getting at is that if we are able to know, and the question was very specific in terms of how many schools have applied, if we can get an understanding of if a review was ever done in terms of the Western Cape, to see that how many schools now would be, in other words, wrongly classified. Do we have information on that one? That would be appreciated. And if we are able to get the information in terms of who is the minister that the department is referring to. I heard you take the appeal or the quintile status for review to the minister. Is that the provincial minister who then takes it to the national minister? If we can get clarity on it, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Eli, you want to respond?
Yeah, what happens here in terms of the review of a school's quintile system, that goes to our minister, our own minister, our MEC for education in this province. The national minister has declared it, and that's laid down in terms of SASA. What we as a province do, we have to apply that particular policy. And I think that's what Ms. Feldman was trying to refer to say this is how we deal with it in terms of review. And in that process happens within the province. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis, I omitted you. Member Kama, I shall come back to you. Mr. Lewis.
Chair, no, I just want to further augment what Mr. Eli said around about the application of SIAS and the support to special schools. One must also remember that special schools, in terms of their norms and standards, are funded differently in terms of the learner weight. In other words, depending on the disability, one learner at a special school can count up to 5 learners, and then that learner gets funded what 5 learners at another school would have received. So one must just bear that in mind. And then in the system we have what we call resource centers, which geographically serve a certain number of schools. So if schools do have challenges with learners, then they approach these resource centers where specialists then assist teachers or schools. And then the last one is we also have a number of full service schools, and that is those schools which have a special additional classroom to the school and a special teacher dealing with some remedial and curriculum support work. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Member Kama, I'm back with you for your follow-up.
Thanks, Chair. My follow-up was partly covered by Member Allen, but I don't think it was sufficiently responded to. Because what I wanted to understand, Chair, is there any review that is done by the department as opposed to a particular school applying for a review of its quintile status, but where the department will conduct a broad, like a cross-broad review of the quintile system of the schools, understanding that the department at its disposal has data from other departments like your social development, which will assist us to correctly allocate a school to according to its quintile level. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I'm also going to take the follow-up of Member Christians.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's the same of the quintile. I was to believe, it was told to us previously that if you want to change a quintile, the submission must be made to the national minister and not the provincial minister. So if the department can just explain, did that change over time? And what is the competency now with the provincial minister to change a quintile? I just want to know that, because we were told previously the national minister determines the quintiles. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Eli, I note your hand. Is it to respond to the follow-ups?
Yes, Chair.
Please go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I just want to respond specifically to Mr. Christensen's question around the national minister. I think, as Ms. Veldman indicated, that the national quintiles is determined by the national minister. If we want to change the no-fee status of a school, that is a provincial competency. So, and yes, we can change the quintile system of a school in the province, but again, it must be within the parameters as indicated by National Treasury in terms of resource targeting table. Those things are set for us. But again, when it comes to the national quintile system, that is a national competency. It's not a provincial competency. We only get given, say, for example, quintile 1 should be 10% of the learners or 9% of the learners in this province, and then quintile 2 should be what X%. But we can't determine that information we receive from DBE and the National Treasury. So I'm hoping that we are clear about that. I think Ms. Veldman can perhaps respond to the other members' question as well. Thank you.
Chairperson, if I can proceed.
Ms. Veldman, yeah.
Thank you. Also, just to, in addition to what Mr. Eli just referenced, in terms of the South African Schools Act, specifically Section 39, school fees at public schools, it is the competency of the member of the Executive Council, the MEC, to identify additional public schools that may not charge school fees. In other words, those schools that we refer to as voluntary no-fee schools within quintile 4 and 5. The committee will recall I've indicated quintile 1, 2 and 3 are compulsory no-fee schools as declared by the National Minister. And then the MEC has got the competency to identify additional schools within quintile 4 and 5 that can become voluntary no-fee schools, which has been done over the years. And it is subject to sufficient funding that must be secured within the provincial budget. So that part is a provincial competency, and the appeal process basically then is exactly to do that, to change a school's fee status from fee charging to a no fee status. Annual review, the department annually looks at our distribution table in terms of the allowance based on the national poverty distribution table, whether it's possible for us to shift schools within quintiles based on the allocation that's provided to the province. That has happened over the year where we have shifted schools from quintile 4 into quintile 3 if we have space available as per the national poverty distribution table. But because school circumstances are so drastically different, the appeal process at this stage remains the most efficient way to identify appropriate places where the need exists to assist schools in terms of changing their fee status. I don't know if there's another. I think that covers the questions, Chairperson. If we've missed the members can please just remind us if we've missed a question.
I think that covers the follow-ups. I'm going to go to a second round, members. If you wish to pose further questions, I note members Allen and Christians and say it in that order. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. I do want to. I'm hoping I will ask this question correctly with the proper understanding. In terms of the 1446, the money, the 1,446, and extra almost 20% of schools that receive it so that they at least get a minimum amount. I would want to commend the department on that in terms of the extra that the department is doing. But I want to ask a specific question on it. That does that mean that no learner in the Western Cape attends a school that does not receive the minimum amount? I'm not sure if that makes sense, but and if we can get an understanding of where would the Western Cape rank in terms of learners that attend schools that were not getting the minimum amount of funding. I'm not sure if my questions are clear, but then just lastly, Chairperson, whether fees are ever listed as a reason for a learner dropping out of school. If we can get some understanding around it, if fees are ever listed in terms of the dropout rate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Chairperson. Just another question. I'm referring to a school in Mitchell's Plain, a primary school, Westport Primary School. I think it's a no-fee paying school. But if you look at what the children are, they come home with a list of stationery that they must acquire. It works out to thousands of rands. Now, it's a no-fee paying school, but the child comes home, toilet paper, all the different papers, all the different things, they are required then to bring that back to school. Many of our parents cannot afford that, and I just want to know the department's sense on that. You don't pay school fees, but you need to, in order to go to school, back to school, you must spend over 1,000, 2,000 rand just to get the necessary whatever's put on the list. So does the school only supply textbooks, and must the learner now get, irrespective if they can afford it or not, all the stationery, the long list of stationery that is required? And a child, when going home, they don't want to go back to school without those stationery, the list, complete list. So I just want to know, how do we work that out, that you pay thousands of rand for things that you need to take back to school? That's all I'm going to ask now, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Syed.
Thank you, Chair. Mine is twofold. The one is with regards to the teachers that have got the teachers that are 60 years of old and that have got basically, conditions, underlying conditions. What is the plan in place? Because I heard Mr. Eli saying that there is a plan in place. Could you maybe just shed some more light on that? Then in terms of slide number 13, I see that there's no adjustment that's going to be made to the norms and standards for the COVID-19 situation. So do schools have enough in their budgets to fund the hygiene and safety costs that are now going to be incurred? I just wanted to get a sense of that. And has the department, from the financial point of view, engaged perhaps with provincial treasury to see whether something can come from the provincial reserves in that regard? Are there also plans to add hygiene and safety costs into the categories in the WCED 032 forms to ensure that that schools budget for these? If not, what are the measures that are being basically taken to ensure this? And then, okay, I think that's it for me. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I wish to know any schools, any of our quintiles 1, 2, and 3, Ms. Valsman or Mr. Eli, are any of those in arrears in regard to the municipalities that they have to pay? Thank you. Over to you, Ms. Veldsman. And Mr. Eli?
Thank you, Chairperson. Firstly, the question in terms of the no fee threshold, the 1446. Yes, it's true that there should be no learner currently attending a school where the funding is below the no fee threshold. We must just remember that funding is made up of three main aspects. If it's a fee charging school, it will be the norms and standards allocation provided by the department per learner, plus a top-up funding to that school should the funding be below the threshold, as I've explained on one of the slides. And the third aspect is the actual school fees that the learner must contribute. Those three added together will get to the no fee threshold or even exceed the no fee threshold. Then if a learner should be in a position that they cannot afford to pay the school fees, causing the school to receive funding below the no fee threshold because the school fee portion falls away, that is when the school has the lever to access the compensation for school fee exemption to bring the school back to the level of the no fee threshold. Therefore, no school should be currently operating below the no fee threshold. In terms of reasons listed for dropout for fee charging, Mr. Lewis possibly be best positioned to answer that. Going to the matter of school learners in schools that are in no fee schools asking for additional contributions. Although Mr. Lewis will be able to add on to that, I can just confirm that the allocation letter provided to schools, which is also used when we approve a school's budget, clearly specifies the four main focus areas that the school should budget for. First one being local purchases, and local purchases where schools must specifically make provision for stationery for the learners as well as any consumables, which will include things like toilet paper. Their municipal accounts, textbooks for the learners, as well as any day-to-day maintenance that the school is responsible for. And I made the example earlier in terms of a broken window or a gutter that needs to be cleaned, etc. So in terms of the school's budgeting process of the norms and standards allocation, they should make provision for all these categories. Then in terms of the allocation for norms and standards, whether it's going to be enough to fund any COVID-related expenses, we, from the provincial budget of the Western Cape Education Department, we have reprioritized a substantial amount to be able to assist schools with the startup allocation of a substantial amount of consumables in terms of COVID, cleaning chemicals, hygiene, hand sanitizers, the masks, etc. Schools, just like the department, also have to look at in terms of reprioritizing their norms and standards if they should require to top up this. Quintile 1 up to 3 schools, whether any of them are in arrears in terms of the municipal accounts, yes, it happens, and it's an annual occurrence for various reasons. One of these reasons could be that schools simply do not have the financial ability to cover it within their current financial budget allocations, and that is why the department has got a special allocation for assisting schools in need in terms of municipal arrears. That is funding over and above the norms and standard allocation, and we allocate that specifically to assist schools with these arrears. Back to the other members of the Western Cape Education Department.
SG, I note your hand.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I just want to respond to 2 of the issues, and then if you'll allow me then to please just the question that that member, I nearly made him minister, member Christians asked around Westville School and stationery. There's no compulsion in such a case where a governing body agrees that there can be some requests from schools. There isn't a compulsion. But I also do understand that there's always a bit of psychological pressure. You know, kids don't want to be left out, etc. The reality of the matter is that sometimes parents in no-fee environments can contribute, and parents in low-fee environments can contribute and don't. And the attitude and the mindset of contributing to the value of education is something that is not spoken about, in my view, adequately across the system. And it's part of the issue about everything must be free and given for free. And years ago, it wasn't a question of it necessarily being like that. It was valuing that which you contribute towards. That's the one thing. The second thing is there simply isn't enough money for schools. And if they can ask parents to contribute, even in poor communities, and parents do contribute, I think it is to the benefit of the learners and to the value of the school. And then lastly, just a very interesting thing was said the other day in a meeting by an independent group that was charging fees in a poor area. And surprisingly, 80 or something, 90% of the parents were able to contribute more than 1,500 Rand a month to fees for the independent education. So it's not that people that all people that live in poor quintiles are incapable of contributing for the benefit of their education. It's a question of whether it is believed that there's value, and it's a question also, I think, of an issue of whether the expectation is free or not. So in that particular case that you cite there, no doubt the governing body, who are representative of parents, feel that it is okay to ask parents to contribute. And we must always not forget the role of governing bodies in this space. And then the question of Member Sayed, it's not a question that is on the agenda for today, but it is a burning issue, and Chair, there had been some conversation on it earlier, so I'll gladly respond. Teachers over 60s in the education environment are not deemed to be incapable of working. The current conversation is teachers over 60 who have one or more comorbidities. That is the discourse that is at the moment strong in the education arena nationally. Unfortunately, the direction of dealing with comorbidities has not yet come in a coordinated way from national. And last Saturday, when I communicated to the schools, because I knew that people needed to go, I had agreed in a conversation with unions on Saturday morning that we would say to teachers that potentially are living with a comorbidity, a recognized comorbidity, is that if their comorbidity is within the ranges that is indicated by the National Department of Health, we would seek to accommodate them and to try to find a concession for such teachers. So I wrote to them on Saturday indicating that there are 3 things that are required of such an educator. The one is they must write to their principals applying for a concession. They can't just stay away. If they just stay away, then it means that they are withholding their services, and then there are other processes that have to happen. So they have to write to their principals, apply for a concession because of their comorbidity. They then have to add to that a doctor's report of the history of their condition, not just a medical certificate, a history report. And that is required because of the fact that in the comorbidity range, there are ranges, for example, blood pressure, diabetes, etc. There are levels below which they might have high blood pressure, but they're not considered to be severe enough to serve as a comorbidity. This is the National Department of Health's input. So they submit that. The third thing that we're asking them to submit is a plan of how they propose that their paid services can be continued through working from home or in some other safe environment. For example, if they are working in an office and do not have contact with anyone else, if It doesn't mean that they have to be at home. But if, for example, they have a comorbidity and they propose a plan that they are able to work from home, for example, they indicate that they prepared because they also need to take some responsibility to enable them to then do what is required. If, for example, they say they'll make sure that they have a laptop and a cell phone, that they'll videotape every lesson that they're responsible for and send that to the school on a daily basis, then that plan we want to know because the school has to manage that plan. In such a case, we will present their proposal to a team which we've established in head office that has a health professional that has been identified by the Department of Health, a professional from the service provider of the health and wellness service provider, an education specialist, and a PMP or human resource individual. That team will then evaluate each of the requests or of the requests for concession. And we will then, in the course of the next week, they're supposed to submit that by tomorrow, Wednesday, to their principals, who will submit it to the district with a support from the principal in whether they are prepared and able to manage that teacher's condition in the school. That then gets submitted by the districts to head office, and we will then take a look at every individual case. And from the medical perspective, either approve it or reject the request. If it's rejected, they must come back to school the following day. If it is approved, then the principal must oversee the mechanism, and we'll consider putting a teacher assistant, if we are able to do so, into that classroom so that the teacher can prepare lessons and display it in the classroom, for example, and we will then seek to pay a stipend to a classroom assistant or a teaching assistant in the class. That's the thinking at the moment in the absence of national directions on the matter. We have, of course, discussed with the National Department on it. There is similar thinking that is evolving in this space. The DG has indicated that he will also take it to the ELRC for clarification. I've made the point that it's late and it's urgent and needs clarification because learners are returning to school on Monday. Teachers are back at school this week. We have also indicated over the weekend that teachers who have applied for comorbidities and have submitted a medical report may, for the time being, remain at home until we evaluate their application. Those that have not yet submitted a medical report have to return to school until that is submitted. I hope that covers it. It's a very sensitive issue that we are seeking to find a solution for in the most possible caring way that tries to keep our people as safe as possible. And the fact that someone has a comorbidity, colleagues, does not make them sick or ill or unable to work. The fact that the person is over 60 does not suddenly make them useless. I mean, ask me, I can guarantee that for you. It doesn't make them useless. There's a huge contribution that these people can still play, and let us find a way to make them contribute their full teaching load in a safe environment as possible. Thank you, Chair. I just want to, I'm not sure if Mr. Eli wants to conclude any left out questions. If you will, excuse me, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, SG. Yes, at this point in time, I will excuse you. You have indicated you have to leave earlier. Thank you very much, SG, and for answering to the questions that we have posed. Go well and be safe.
You're welcome. And Chair, if I may, just if you'll allow me a last one, I know that in these question and answer questions is not always all answered, but members are welcome to also contact me, and if there are any questions they wish to have clarity on, they're most welcome to do so. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Eli?
Thank you, Chair. I think there was just one question that might remain, the issue around us engaging with Provincial Treasury. And then there was also a question on the 042s or 043s. I think, Chair, just on the question around funding and etc., we are engaging with Provincial Treasury. But I think we also have to be mindful of the current economic situation where the country is now facing a recession with the economy contracting, and that obviously will place severe pressure on the national fiscus as well. So yeah, but we are engaging with provincial treasury around these matters. Then around the forms that schools have to complete, my understanding is that most of the PPEs are actually just normal hygiene issues, which schools in the past would have purchased. In some cases, like they wouldn't have maybe purchased hand sanitizers, perhaps, but they would have purchased bleaches and all these other things, disinfectants that we normally would have purchased. So those things will fall into that category, and therefore the forms we have should make allowances for those type of expenditure or budgets that they might want to amend and incur. So I don't think there's anything that we have to amend in that regard. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Eli, I just want to follow up with regards to, and I think earlier in the year when we had the department for the annual performance plan, the department indicated the 5% cut in budget. Now, with that said, and also the funding that the department has to make available now for COVID-19 contingencies, how would this impact on the norms and standards, if at all?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just around the potential 5% cut, that was just to go back to that question, Chair, that was a scenario that was sketched to us by provincial treasury, and I think it was a national thing as well. That didn't materialize in our province. What happened in our province, there was certain funding that was just earmarked, but it didn't result in a decrease in our budget, and so therefore that matter was taken care of. Just around your question again, Chair, around pardon me, Chair, you had another question around the
I said, Mr. Eli, with regards to the COVID-19 funding, yes, that you, how would that impact on the norms and standards?
Yeah, Chairperson, just we received a indication from DBE that they received a concession from National Treasury that the infrastructure grant, the EIG grant, can be used for COVID and the procurement of the PPEs in this particular case. So that's what Ms. Falcon was referring to when she was talking about reprioritization. So that was done from the conditional grant, because as you would appreciate, Chair, at the moment, there's no infrastructure, well, for the month in terms of lockdown, there was no infrastructure obviously happening at schools or cost being incurred. And that would obviously, in terms of projection, would have resulted in a possible underexpenditure. However, DBE and National Treasury has agreed that funding, that specific funding, can be used for this particular purpose. So at the moment, it does not have an impact on the normal standards, and I do not foresee it having an impact going forward. I think the main issue that will influence the funding of normal standards going forward is what Ms. Falcon was referring to, is the availability of budget and the economic climate that could possibly put I think would be for every department, could put the finances in jeopardy as far as the continuous funding of certain activities are concerned. I think that will be true for government as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, I'm going to allow for a next round of questions, if there are any. It seems that there are not any questions for this round. That would then bring us to the end of our session with the department. Ms. Feldman and the team, thank you very much for the presentation, and thank you for the interaction and answering to all our questions. If we need further information, we shall do this in our recommendations and then forward it to you via our procedural officer. At this point in time, I wish to say thank you to you and go well and keep safe. Members, please stay behind for our admin task after the department has left us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Go well as well.
you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Chair.
members.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you, Chair.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Members, with the department that has left us, I am open for recommendation or request for further information. Please indicate. Members, are you there?
Yes, we are here.
Okay. Any recommendations or any requests for further info from the department on this presentation?
Chair, member questions?
It was all quiet and all at once. Everybody wants to speak. Member Christians?
Chair, I still don't. There's two things that I would like to get from the department. I think the one is what they said, the no feeing schools that was approved and those that they're assisting, taking their hand to those who are not approved, just to get a sense of that. But the other thing that I think is that they just give us a clear understanding of, they said the appeal process must be followed, but schools that are not in the same position as before, if they can give us a detailed process, because, you know, then we can advise principals and those people to apply to have their, a lot of schools in quintile 4 and 5, and they cannot afford to be there. Can they just give us the correct process of what schools should do in order to qualify for no paying schools? Thank you, Chair.
You're almost asking for a step-by-step guide?
I think so, Chair. I don't know, you know, if you get to the schools, like I said, the one in Mitchell's Plain I've been at, the one in the other place in Alsace I've been at, and the schools are struggling, and I don't know if they know what is the correct procedure to apply for to be a no fee paying school. I don't know. So if they can give us a step-by-step. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Member Allen, I noted you.
Thank you, Chairperson. I'm covered by Member Christians regarding the procedure that needs to be followed in terms if a school wishes to challenge the quintile ranking. That's my one. Thank you.
Any members that I have missed? No. Okay. I just want to know those schools that are in arrears with their municipal accounts, if we could have a list per district. Wasima?
Yes, Chairperson, a list of all the schools, actually.
Yeah. Those schools in arrears?
Yes, Chairperson.
Thank you. Wasima, if you can just read back to us, please.
Hi, Chair. Thanks. Through you. Mr. Christians has asked for all the no-fee schools that has been approved and not approved by the department. Also, a step-by-step guide as to the process that schools could follow to become a no-fee schools and challenging the quintile system. And then you've asked for schools in arrears with the municipality accounts, a list per district, and Mr. Mackenzie has asked per the names of those schools too, to be added to that list.
Yeah, so it's the names of those schools per district then. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, members.
Yes.
Then that takes care of that, of the presentation that
Sorry, Chair.
Who's
Sorry,
this,
Chair,
member
can I just add to what
Christians?
member Christians? Can I just add those schools that were not approved for no fee pay? I think it's 15 that's been approved, and the 30 somewhat was not approved. If they can tell us, are they guiding those schools in order to come financially sustainable, because they're struggling, you know? So I just want to have that process as well. So the 15, the others has not been successful, but are they taking those schools, hand by the hand in order to become financially viable? That if we can also get that with that list, thank you.
Which
Sure,
reminds
not a
me, member
problem.
Christians, I'm going to add to that, those schools that were not successful, if we can get a list, and then also if they could give us the reasons why those schools were not successful, so that we can also have a better understanding.
Sure, I'll
Yeah,
add
Chair, if I
that.
can, thank you, Chairperson. This is just to tell what they've said to us, and this is why I'm saying that. But you're right. What they said to us, if they do not approve, then they take the hand of those schools in order for them to qualify for non-paying or to become. So they said, listen, you don't qualify, but this is what we're going to do in order for you to become financially sustainable. So that's why. But we can ask it the way you also. But I'm just thinking of what they said. They assist the school even if they don't qualify. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Can we step off the recommendations then? Then our next task is to look at the draft minutes dated the 12th of May. Members, you all have received it. Wasima, are you able to put it on screen?
I'm not sure. Are you able to see it?
Okay, we're able to see. Yes.
Are you?
We are. You must just scroll up so that we can go through the document. Members, just check your presence, whether that is recorded correctly.
I'm moving
Continue.
further down.
Scroll up. Members, that takes care of page 1. I'm on page 2 now.
I'm moving to page 2.
Check the request for information where that is correctly recorded. Please continue. Scroll up. Members, that is the minutes. Can I have a proposer and a seconder?
It's unpacked.
Members, can I have a proposer to adopt the draft minutes? Member Karma?
Member
Chair, I
Christians.
propose that we adopt.
Member Karma? Member Karma? I'm just thinking at this point that both members, you and member Said, are in the meeting, and you are the alternative to member Said. So therefore, you cannot propose.
Noted, Chair.
Thank you.
Sure, I propose that we accept member Christians.
Thank you. Can I have a seconder for member Christians? Thank you, member Christians. Thank you, member Allen. So it's member Christians and member Allen. Thank you. Then members, moving on to the draft program that was sent out by the our procedural officer, and the considering to adopt the draft program as it is. There are some changes, and the change was is recorded on the 2nd. And then members, those of you who are Those of you who are in programming would recall that during this morning's programming, the programming committee agreed to personal contact oversight or committee meeting. Those of you who were there, I made a recommendation in this committee for an oversight on the 9th of June. You recall that? Or members
Yes,
still in the
Chairperson, we remember, Chairperson, I recall that.
Okay, now my proposal was to go to a metro area to do oversight after the learners has, gone back to school, which is a week after. Would be on the 9th of June. I wish to add to that, and I'm taking your guidance on this. I wish to add the Witzenberg municipal area to it. I'm taking your guidance and I'm taking your input on it.
Chair, can I come in,
Yes.
Chair?
Yeah, sure.
Chair, I think it is a good idea because you see, Witzenberg is it's one of the hotspot areas. It's quite an increase in infections. So I think it will be a good idea. But I think I think let's maybe play it by. We can have it on the program for now, but obviously if the situation gets really bad and out of control that side, then we may want to look at maybe parking it, because we would also have to travel there and then traveling together, or maybe we'll have to see. Look, if we go to Witzenberg, we'll have to say that then members could probably go in their own vehicles. If we do go in the big bus, I think we must just look at the logistics around these things when it comes to traveling together, given the distancing, and yeah, that's it. But in principle, I agree with
In principle, you agree. Okay, thank you. Any other inputs?
Member Christians, I had my hand up.
Sorry, member Christians, apologies. I'm noting you.
No problem. Chair, so the understanding that I have is that we only do the metro, and that is the 9th, and then we will look at another date for Witzenberg. We're not doing the two together. Eh? Are we saying we only do the metro, and then we will look at other day, as Member Syed said, if you look at that other arrangements that, social distancing and all of those type of things. And of course, you can't sleep over at Ceres, you'll have to come back again, and those type of things.
My idea was actually that we do it in one day. We do a metro school and we do a Witzenberg school. That was my actual proposal. But as I say, I take guidance from you. Also, what was said that there should be a clear plan in terms of the COVID-19 regulations that we have to follow in terms of social distancing. This committee has to put out a clear plan as to how we are going to do this.
Chair, I propose that we do the metro first, see how we handle that, and then we can go to a hotspot. But first, I think we should get it right first in the metro and have a clear plan for the metro first. Because the metro, although Witzenberg is one of those areas, but in the metro, you have tremendous hotspots as well. And so we might go to one of the hotspots in the metro, and that will take some planning. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, all right. Any other members who wish to add? There is the proposal that it is a metro school that we visit on the 9th, and then park the Witzenberg for now. Any other inputs?
I agree with that, Chairperson.
Okay. Can I then ask that in terms of that proposal, that the senior procedural officer, our procedural officer, and myself get together so that we can plot a plan in terms of the COVID-19 regulations that we can then lay forward again to either to the programming committee or to the chief whip in terms of how we are going to do this.
Not a problem.
Agreed, Chairperson. Member Christians.
Thank you, Member Christians. Thank you. Members, then with that said, I wish to thank you for being in the committee today. Also to our IT staff who were the IT guidance for us. We had a bit of challenges also today, so thank you for their assistance. And then to our procedural officer and the senior procedural officer, thank you very much for your assistance in this meeting today. Members, with that said, I wish to wish you
happy birthday to Member Allen.
We did that yesterday, Member Christians.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you so much.
Sorry. Yeah.
We did that on the group yesterday, so thank you.
Thank you.
Chairperson.
Yes. Who's that?
Can I
Member?
ask that members
Mackenzie.
please read the Cluster A report, please, for tomorrow's meeting.
Members, there's a reminder to read the Cluster A report. It was received whilst we sat in this meeting, I think, or just before. And there is a cluster adopting of report meeting tomorrow. And I think it is in the health slot, 9 o'clock?
Yes,
Member Mackenzie?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So that is then tomorrow. Members, be safe. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
This meeting is now adjourned.
Bye-bye.